They thought a simple black traveler could be pushed aside without consequence. Jean-Luc Moreau, a powerful French executive, and Celeste, a polished flight attendant, believed they could humiliate Malik Sano, a quiet, unassuming man boarding a flight home to Africa. They saw only his skin, his humble clothes, and assumed silence. But they were wrong. Because when they singled out Malik, they didn't realize they were trying to shame the president of Balandra himself, a leader who had fought for his people's dignity and sovereignty. What came next wasn't just a personal stand. It was a global reckoning. Justice, swift and undeniable, was about to turn the tables. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you're watching from and make sure to subscribe, because the story you're about to hear isn't just about one man, it's about all of us. Outside the plane, the African sun blazed against the runway, casting sharp shadows as rows of soldiers stood at full attention. Inside, the cabin held its breath, waiting for a truth too powerful to remain hidden. The first light of morning spilled over the international terminal like a soft sigh. The airport, usually a place of noise and rush, lay unusually still, almost reverent, as if waiting for something it could not name. Among the early travelers, a solitary figure leaned against the window at gate 42, hands tucked casually into the pockets of a faded jacket. His name was Malik Sano. To most around him, he was just another African traveler, perhaps a professor, a merchant, a man with humble business abroad. No entourage trailed behind him, no expensive watch gleamed on his wrist, no loud phone calls announced his presence. Malik moved with a patience, a groundedness, that seemed almost foreign in the bustling anonymity of the airport. Yet Malik Sano was not a simple man. He was the president of Balandra, a young, fiercely independent nation still nursing the deep scars of colonization. A leader who had promised his people not just sovereignty, but dignity, and part of that promise meant living it, even when no one was watching. He refused the traditional trappings of power. He believed that greatness must first be humble, a belief that shaped every step he took, from dusty village roads to diplomatic halls in Europe. Now, returning from intense negotiations about the future of Balandra's gold reserves and the preservation of their cultural autonomy, Malik only longed for home. No ceremonies, no bodyguards, just the red earth under his feet again. Isn't it strange how true power often hides in plain sight, invisible to those too busy looking for crowns and velvet robes? As he stood quietly, watching the line of passengers fidget with passports and coffee cups, Malik smiled to himself. He understood something they did not. That real strength needed no announcement. It was something worn inside the soul, not stitched onto a uniform. Outside, a plane rumbled onto the tarmac. The boarding call crackled through the speakers, and the small crowd began to stir. Malik hoisted his worn leather bag over one shoulder and moved forward, not as a ruler above his people, but as one of them, unseen and unbothered. Little did anyone know, by the time this plane touched the earth again, the world would remember his name. Malik Sano boarded the plane with the same quiet grace he carried everywhere. He offered a soft bonjour to the flight attendant, his voice low and kind, before settling into seat 2A by the window. A shaft of morning light caught the edge of his worn jacket as he fastened his seatbelt and pulled out a battered novel from his bag. To everyone else, he was nobody, and that, he thought, was perfect. But a few rows behind, a different energy brewed. Jean-Luc Moreau, a senior executive of one of Europe's largest energy conglomerates, had just arrived at the gate. His shoes, polished to a mirror shine, clicked sharply against the floor as he approached the counter, his small army of assistants trailing behind him like obedient shadows. When the agent politely informed him that business class was full, Jean-Luc's face hardened. "Impossible," he snapped. "Do you know who I am?" Of course they knew. And they scrambled. Screens were checked, supervisors were called. But the truth was simple. There was no room, unless, perhaps, Someone could be encouraged to move. Jean-Luc leaned in, voice dripping with entitlement. Make it happen. Isn't it astonishing how some believe rules were crafted for others but never for themselves? Minutes later, a sleek blonde attendant named Celeste climbed onto the aircraft, her smile polished but cold. Her eyes swept business class like a hawk searching for prey. They stopped at Malik, alone, dressed plainly, invisible to status-seeking eyes. She whispered something into her colleague's ear. A plan was forming, quiet and sharp-edged. Outside, the engines roared to life, but inside, a different kind of turbulence was gathering. One not of air, but of arrogance. Malik, lost in his book, didn't notice the glances yet. He didn't sense the trap being laid. Not yet. He turned a page slowly, savoring a line that spoke of dignity and patience. Funny, he thought, how life always tests you just when you least expect it. And the first tusk was already walking down the aisle toward him. Celeste approached Malik Sano's seat with a smile so tight it looked painful to wear. She leaned down, her voice dipped in false politeness. "Excuse me, sir. May I see your boarding pass?" Malik, unbothered, handed it over without a second thought. He met her gaze with the quiet confidence of someone who had no need to prove anything. She glanced at the pass, then back at him, a flicker of doubt crossing her face. Seat 2A, perfectly valid. Yet, something in her eyes betrayed her. A calculation, a judgment. "Sir," she began, this time with a hint of firmness, "we have an operational request. Would you mind relocating to economy? You will, of course, be compensated." For a moment, the hum of the plane's engines seemed to fall silent. Malik closed his book, resting it gently on his lap. "And why?" he asked, voice calm as still water. "Am I being asked to move?" Celeste's smile faltered. "No specific reason, sir. Just a small adjustment. Isn't it curious how the language of discrimination often wears the costume of adjustments and policies?" The tension thickened. A few nearby passengers stole glances over the tops of newspapers and laptop screens, but no one spoke. No one ever spoke. Malik shifted slightly in his seat, folding his hands. "I will remain where I am," he said simply. It was not a protest, not a shout. It was a statement of existence, firm, immovable, undeniable. Celeste blinked, unprepared for resistance from a man she had already dismissed in her mind. "Sir," she insisted, her voice now coated with a brittle edge, "please cooperate. This is for operational reasons." Malik's eyes, dark and steady, met hers without blinking. "If it's operational," he said, "why am I the only one being asked?" The question hung in the air, heavier than any shouting could have been. Celeste turned away sharply, frustration crackling beneath her professional veneer. She wasn't used to losing ground, especially not to someone like him. But Malik simply sat back, reopened his book, and let the weight of his refusal settle like a stone dropped into still water. Sometimes, silence itself is the loudest kind of resistance. Frustrated, Celeste retreated toward the front of the cabin, her heels clicking with clipped urgency. Minutes later, she returned, but this time, her strategy had changed. She moved past Malik without a glance, and instead hovered near another passenger, a young black man sitting quietly in 3C, earbuds in, head resting against the seat. "Sir, could you please come with me?" she asked, her tone sharper, colder. The young man blinked, confused. "Is there a problem?" he asked, pulling out an earbud. "No," Celeste replied curtly, "but we need your seat for operational purposes." Operational purposes again. The same hollow excuse. Around them, whispers began to rise, threading through the cabin like smoke. Passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some frowned. A few lowered their screens, sensing the unease they could no longer ignore. Why is it that injustice often begins in the small, quiet humiliations we're taught to overlook? Malik watched, unmoving, his expression unreadable. His patience, so deeply ingrained, was now taut like a bowstring drawn to its limit. The young man hesitated, then glanced at Malik, an unspoken question hanging between them. Malik rose slowly, standing tall despite the confined space of the cabin. His voice, when it came, was low, but carried the force of a hammer striking iron. "Enough," he said. Every head turned. "You are targeting passengers, not based on tickets," Malik continued, "but based on the color of their skin. That is not an adjustment. That is discrimination." The accusation cracked through the air. Celeste stiffened, her face flushing red under the harsh cabin lights. For a moment, the entire aircraft seemed to hold its breath. Even the engines roaring outside sounded distant, muffled by the weight of Malik's truth. "Do you feel it too? That sudden, electric moment when silence becomes more dangerous than any shout?" Celeste opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Malik remained standing, a living monument to quiet defiance. Around him, the first embers of awakening had begun to glow in the eyes of those who had, until now, chosen to look away. The battle for dignity had truly begun, and it was far from over. The wheels screeched against the tarmac, jolting the cabin into a momentary hush. Malik Sano remained seated, gazing out the window, where the fiery sun of Balandra was just beginning to crest over the distant hills. His hands rested calmly on the armrests, steady and sure. Outside, a scene unlike any the passengers had expected unfolded. Black SUVs and armored vehicles lined the runway in rigid formation. Soldiers stood at attention, their uniforms crisp, weapons gleaming under the relentless sun. At the front of the convoy, a group of ministers and military officers awaited, unmoving, statues carved from loyalty and pride. Inside the cabin, ripples of unease spread. "Are we landing into a war zone?" a foreign businessman whispered nervously. "No," came a shaky reply. "This looks ceremonial." Jean-Luc Moreau, still preening in his seat, smirked arrogantly. "Must be for me," he joked to Celeste, adjusting his tie with smug precision. Celeste, still rattled, laughed too loudly, desperate to regain her composure. Isn't it tragic how arrogance blinds us, even in the face of undeniable truth? The plane came to a halt. For a moment no one moved. Then, "Boots!" thundered up the boarding stairs. The cabin door swung open with a metallic hiss, and a tall officer, his beret low over piercing eyes, strode down the aisle. He stopped at 2A. He saluted, sharp, reverent. "What you doing?" "Mr. President," the officer said in a voice that carried through the stunned silence. "Welcome home." A collective gasp rippled through the cabin. Jean-Luc dropped his glass, shattering it against the floor. Celeste's clipboard slipped from her hands. Faces paled, mouths hung open. "What do you feel in moments like these? Shame, awe, or something far deeper?" Malik rose, moving with the same quiet dignity he had worn all along. He gave a small nod, neither gloating nor seeking vengeance. His presence said everything. Power did not need noise to be known. Behind him, soldiers moved swiftly. Jean-Luc and Celeste were approached, their protest silenced with a cold, simple order: "You will come with us." The judgment they had never expected had finally arrived, not in anger, but in justice. The sun blazed high above as Malik Sano stepped onto the tarmac, a modest figure flanked by towering guards. Cameras clicked like thunderclaps. The air vibrated with the cheers of those who had gathered to welcome him home. His people, farmers, soldiers, students, raised their hands, chanting his name, not in fear, but in fierce, unyielding pride. Inside the terminal, a small podium had been hastily set up. Malik approached it without haste. The sleeves of his simple jacket rolled back to his forearms, the dust of the land still clinging to his shoes. No golden sash, no velvet banners. Only a man and his voice. He leaned forward into the microphone, pausing to let the silence settle over the crowd like a warm blanket. "In Balandra, Malik began, his voice steady and full. "We do not measure a man's worth by the color of his skin or the weight of his wallet." The words struck deep, reverberating through the hall like a stone thrown into still water. Some wept quietly. Others simply bowed their heads. "In Balandra," he continued, "we do not bow to old habits born from chains and conquest. We bow only to dignity, to humanity, to the future we build with our own hands." Isn't it powerful to witness a people reclaim their story after centuries of being written by others? Malik's gaze swept across the sea of faces, brown, weathered, proud, and he felt the enormity of the moment pulse through his chest. "This is not a colony," he said, each word sharp as a blade. "This is a sovereign nation, our soil, our sky, our destiny." A roar of applause erupted, rolling over the fields beyond like a tide. Malik let it wash over him, not for his ego, but for the hope it carried. He had not come to rule over them. He had come to rise with them. Behind him, Jean-Luc and Celeste were quietly led away in handcuffs, forgotten by the crowd that no longer saw them as important. Because in that moment, Balandra did not belong to outsiders or to power. It belonged to its people and to the dream they refused to surrender. The story of Malik Sano's return ignited across the globe faster than any wildfire. Videos leaked online, shaky footage from passengers who had captured the moment when the officer saluted Malik. The stunned faces of Jean-Luc Moreau and Celeste as they were escorted away in disgrace. Within hours, hashtags bloomed like storms. Respect Balandra, dignity first, new Africa. Young people across the continent flooded the internet with messages of solidarity, videos of traditional dances, murals painted overnight in vibrant colors bearing Malik's likeness, not as a king, but as a symbol of quiet, unbreakable resistance. In the cafes of Paris and Berlin, murmured conversations shifted uneasily. In the boardrooms of multinational corporations, panicked meetings were called. Air Balandra, a small but proud airline, issued a statement of support for Malik's actions. Meanwhile, Jean-Luc's company scrambled to distance itself from him, issuing hollow apologies that only deepened public outrage. And Celeste, once a name known only to flight manifests, now found herself at the center of a storm she could not outrun. Isn't it extraordinary how a single moment, a single refusal to bow can ripple outward and alter the course of history? At the Ministry of Justice, Malik made a simple declaration. There will be no immunity. Justice belongs to all, or it belongs to none. Jean-Luc faced formal charges in both Balandra and his home country, not just for public insult, but for abuse of power and attempted intimidation. Celeste, broken by interrogation, wept bitterly when told the truth she had failed to see. "You didn't need to know he was a president," the investigator said coldly. "You only needed to treat him as a man." Meanwhile, Malik refused interviews, refused gloating speeches. He returned to work as he had always done, overseeing new schools, building roads where none had existed, and creating opportunities where once there had been only despair. Because true leaders, Malik believed, do not seek to shine for themselves. They build fires that light the way for everyone. And somewhere tonight, under a vast African sky, a child might look up and whisper, "Someday, I will walk with dignity too." True dignity does not shout, and real strength does not boast. Malik Sano's story reminds us that how we treat the quiet stranger beside us says more about who we are than any title ever could. In a world too quick to judge by appearances, it is easy to forget that every soul carries a story we cannot see, and sometimes the ones we overlook are the ones who have carried the heaviest burdens with the greatest. Respect, it turns out, is not earned by wealth or status. It is something owed simply because we all share the same fragile, beautiful thread of humanity. When we choose kindness over assumption, when we offer patience instead of pride, we strengthen that thread, not just for others, but for ourselves. As we walk through each day, It is worth asking, who among us might be carrying greatness in silence? And are we wise enough, gentle enough to recognize it? The world does not need more noise. It needs more people willing to see with their hearts and to honor the quiet dignity in each other. In the quiet after the storm, Malik Sano returned to his people, not with banners or grand speeches, but with the steady, unshakable presence of a man who had nothing to prove. His victory was not the handcuffs on his oppressors or the headlines that followed. It was the simple, sacred act of standing tall without needing to shout, of surviving indignity without losing grace. And in the days that followed, something deeper began to take root. Roads were rebuilt. Justice was pursued not in anger, but with the slow, firm hand of truth. In every corner of Balandra, the lesson echoed. Dignity is not a gift from the powerful. It is the birthright of all. If this story stayed with you, share it. Subscribe to Echoes of Racism so these voices don't fade into silence. In the meantime, I've chosen 2 stories I think will move you just as much. Take care, and we'll see you soon.